بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today's discussion is the second on the series of attempting to have some discourse on the modern Palestine. Last week I pointed out that although Palestine has a long history, and if you check Google, it goes back to 500, 600 or even more before current era. But modern history of Palestine is different from the mere fact that Palestine existed as a place where people lived together. Modern history of Palestine brings together and molds a number of critical political factors that we need to be familiar with, and by learning from them, develop an articulated way of responding to the Zionist narratives that dictates the media in the United States, both on a publicity basis as well as the academic basis. Last week, I gave brief introduction to the issue of that we are confronted with, and I recommended a number of books that they are extremely pertinent and useful for us to learn and to understand the facts that are going on, because the narrative that prevails and in the contemporary media is controlled by the Zionists, and you do not get the information that you want. It's a one-sided one. The most important book was Dr. Rashid Khalidi's book, The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonial Conquest and Resistance, 1917 to 2017. I gave also a few books from Edward Said, Raja Garudi, and Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, and few others. We have them in Arabic. A number of books have been written in Arabic and Farsi, and I believe in Urdu as well. But since most of you are English speakers, are not familiar with other languages, or at least not proficient in other languages, then I would recommend for you to choose one of these. Again, Chomsky's book that is on a collaboration with Ilan Pappé, which is a Jewish scholar, on Palestine as well as the Gaza crisis. Norman Finkelstein. The reason why I recommend these, because they, as soon as you read a book that are not Jews, although they attack them as well, they say, well, this is anti-Semitic. But these are Jewish scholars that have written to a degree impartially about what happened in Palestine. And the Zionist attack on them that these are self-hating Jews. So they always have something for them. But these are few of the books that I recommend. Please find one of these books and read them. 2 or 3 books are extremely necessary for the discussion, the theme that we are going to discuss briefly today, and that is colonialism. These days, those of you who are into political science or international relation or sociology, there is a theme that has come to be discussed in academia. It's called post-colonial discourse. Post-colonial discourse primarily reflects back on the effect of colonialism on the subject. So there is this dichotomy of colonizer, colonized, and the consequence of colonization on these individuals. Number one, which was written in French, discourse translated in English in 1975, but originally was written in 1955. A discourse on colonialism by Amy Césaire, which was Martinique in the Caribbean islands scholar that went to France, and his assessment of history, particularly the power on the language, became so great that they asked for his assistant to write the new constitution for France in French. So he was one of them. The book was published in 1975 in English, and is called Discourse on Colonialism, extremely necessary for somebody who wants to learn something about colonialism. He describes the brutal impact of capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism on both the colonized and the colonizer. What happens to the colonized during colonization, and what happened to the colonizer themselves. There was a meeting or a conference in Egypt in 1994 or 1995 in Cairo, which was organized by feminist movement, global feminist movement. And naturally, feminists from the West started talking about gender and all that issue. And feminists from the East attacked them, that we are still suffering from the post-colonial crisis that you left us with. So there are a number of good articles by Indian scholars, Muslim scholars, and even when it came to voting on certain issues, Catholics and Muslims worked together to thwart the attempt by the feminists to include certain to pass certain resolutions, so that they did not go through. There is another book, again critical, The Colonizer and the Colonized. This guy is a Jew from Tunis, Albert Memmi, first published in 1965. Powerful study of psychological effect of colonization or colonialism on the colonized and the colonizer. Particularly North Africa, he starts with the effect of the French on the colonization, what happened in Algeria, in Morocco, that area. Another excellent scholar comes from Martinique again, is Frantz Fanon, which has got a number of books. The one that he graduated as a psychologist from France, and then went to work in Algeria. And he has first-hand experience of the psychological effect of colonialism on people in Africa, but particularly in Algeria. And the two books that he has is The Wretched of the Earth, The Psychology of the Colonized and Their Path to Liberation. Also, he has Black Skin, White Mask, and The Modern Colonialism, which indirectly looks at how colonizer, a type of colonization that even when they leave, they implant people that appear to be native, but in reality their mind is washed and everything else, so they are no different from the French in case of French, or British in Pakistan and India and other places. Spivak, which is a great writer, she was, looks primarily from what we call leftist socialist values, but she has a very good book that became a textbook. I remember when I was doing post-colonialism, her book was recommended as a must. It's called Can the Subaltern Speak? Are we, as people who were colonized, are given the opportunity to tell our own stories? So this is something that, again, but I would, if you want I may have a copy of The Colonizer and the Colonized somewhere around here, or Discourse on Colonialism by Amy Césaire. Extremely good book. It's not complicated. It's just about probably 100 pages, but it's very detailed in understanding how the colonizer works with colonizer. Now, colonialism and imperialism are sometimes used interchangeably, which is a more articulate way of stating this is colonialism, and imperialism is, in another word, is land grabbing by the powerful individuals. And the whole thing, colonialism, is the process of exploitation of land, people, resources by a foreign power over a long period of time. In the case of France and Algeria, over 150 years. British and the Indian subcontinent is close to around the same amount of time. And some key factors or aspects of colonialism: number one, total control over the conquered land. It started around 15th century, 14 something, by the Portuguese first. When the Western powers at that time, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and later on the Germans, the French, and the British, found out that economically there is a need for a market and for raw material, cheap raw material and cheap labor. They thought, well, since we can't get it in Europe, we have to move our attention somewhere else. And they used the military power to go and literally occupy other lands. The British ultimately went to India, the Dutch went to Far East, which now we call them Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as China was occupied by the British. Unfortunately, what happened, everybody was talking about decolonization after the Second World War. The British became weaker and they lost huge number of their colonies, and the French did the same, the Dutch did the same. Now we have to deal with a new colonial power, a supreme military power, which is United States. United States is going through the same thing as the colonial powers of the time. The second, their regard with the position of the indigenous, of the native, or the native people. Colonialism is marginalization of the native from all aspects of life. So there are various types of colonialism that we talk about in a few minutes. One of the common factor between all these different types is that the natives have to be marginalized. It happened in the United States. It happened in other countries that they got. Marginalization happens by holding the natives to be inferior to their conquerors, calling them savages, uncivilized, terrorists, etc., subaltern, as the Spivak talks about, and making it natural for the genocide of those nations. Once happened in the United States, first you claim American exceptionalism. That's number one. And then once you claim American exceptionalism, then the manifest destiny comes in, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, has given you this right to go and civilize and make the rest of the world human. Otherwise they are subhumans. And the concept of subhumans was something that the Zionists use constantly with regard to the Palestinians, that even international law does not apply here about human right, because there is a factor human in it, and we don't consider Palestinians to be human, so there is no violation of international law. The same thing happened in the United States. Wherever they go, once they define the Iraqis as subhumans, or say the Shias in Lebanon as subhumans, or people that fought in India for their liberation, or in Kenya or somewhere else, or Algeria, as subhumans, then it justifies genocides of those people as a fact, because you need to get rid of them as much as possible. Now, how did colonialism develop itself? For a number of reasons. Mercantilism, which was purely economic, that is a country wealthy and powerful, they try to find out new market for their product, which happened in British India, and new cheap supply. If you go to Baker Street in London and you go probably the first underground station that was built, there are timbers that they have brought to support the bridge for the trains, and most of these timbers were brought in either from the colonies in Africa or the colonies in India or somewhere else. So raw material, enslaved labor, ideological, which they used it to justify this, manifest destiny, religious, Christianity, we need to turn them into Christians. Even philosophers such as Hegel, when he talks about dark Africa as part of his philosophical process, that there is nothing worthy of talking about history and so on in Africa. So they used it to justify it. And white supremacy, racial, that we are the most selected race, the best race, and everybody else is inferior, so we need to go and deal with them. There are a number of factors that when you read books on colonialism, it comes out. So the essence of colonialism is a powerful Western country occupying and directly controlling weaker countries to use their resources to increase its own power and wealth. Portuguese use this constantly, and then Spanish, that now that we are in conflict with other European leaders, what gives us an edge over, say, Portuguese over the Spanish is the wealth that we have and the influence we have. Then the only thing we can do is to get. The process began in, as I said, in the 15th century by Portuguese, and it, contrary to the claim that after the Second World War, with the liberation of a number of countries, the process of colonization ended, I would argue that it still exists, because there are a number of different types of colonialism, that one was replaced by the other. Now, these powers, when they want to occupy a land, they would decide as what is the best alternative for them, or what is the strategy. And that strategy ultimately defines the class or the category of colonialism. Number one is settler colonialism. This type involves huge number of people given opportunity or forcefully moved to the colonies to establish a colony. Australia becomes a classic example. The British had too many people in their prisons, murderers, killers, and so on. So rather than spend huge amount of money on these people, decided that we ship them where? To Australia, an empty island, what they consider to be an empty island. Natives, they are barbaric, savages, they are not considered to be human beings, so they are discarded, and we dump these people over there. What they do, it's their problem. Once they manage to establish a colony over there for themselves, the British moved in to control and influence the colony in their favor. So the natural resources and everything else began to go towards the British. And most dramatic effect of colonialism and the consequences on the native is in Bengal. When the British began to take food out of Bengal to England, and as a consequence of that caused huge amount of famine in Bengal, that over 3.5 million people were killed, Winston Churchill was told to reduce some of this, make people provided for people. He said he wouldn't do that. The fault is theirs because they breed like rabbits. Why should they do that? So they should stop breeding. Whatever meager things that we leave for them, it's enough. And we see the same thing happen in Aborigines in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, and United States, and other places. Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, South Africa, United States are examples of what we call settler colonialism. White people going from the motherland into somewhere else. The French attempted to create such thing in Algeria, but it didn't work. They brought a number of French settlers, but the resistance of the Algerian people ultimately during the War of Independence became too harsh, what we see now in occupied Palestine. Too much for the settlers. Now we're beginning to see in Palestine people saying this place is not safe for us. Why? Because that is not their land. They are artificially put over there. The people of the land would defend it to the last drop of blood. These people immediately seek to find out a better alternative somewhere else and migrate. They began buying huge amount of land, what they did in Palestine in 1930s, in southern Cyprus, Greece, and Greece and other places. And some of them have migrated to Canada, Western Europe, etc., where their ancestors came from. So the French attempted to do this, and unfortunately for them, unfortunately for the Algerian, it didn't happen, and it failed. Brazil is another, where you have the language of the native changed into the language of the colonial power. They succeeded at the beginning. Brazil became Portuguese. Cuba and other part of Africa part of South America became Spanish speakers, although they have their own languages. Spanish speakers. American became English speakers. Canada, at least Quebec part, became French speakers. So wherever they managed to succeed. And now even in East and West Africa, there are countries that they cannot speak Swahili anymore. The first language is French. When you have a conference and the language of the presenter is in Swahili, they immediately jump to the translation to put into English or French or something else. There is another type of colonialism, which we call it exploitation colonialism, which the colonizer does not approach the colonies with a direct group of people to be settled, but they use it for exploitation. They buy the land. In a number of South American countries, banana producers, sugar producers, and everything else, and even in Hawaii, the land is under the name of, say, state, but everything within that land is controlled by the rich, powerful individuals from somewhere else. Southern Sudan, when finally they managed to separate the south from the north, immediately you had huge number of American firms going over there and buying fertile lands that ultimately they are going to turn it into some plantation and so on, that coffee, sugar, cotton, and so on, that is not for the benefit of the native, it's benefit for the benefit of somebody else. What matters for our discussion is what we call surrogate colonialism, which is the third type. It's not directly a group of the motherland people, say the British going or French going and settling somewhere. And it's not buying land by the colonial states for the purpose, or their agents, or for the purpose of production and controlling the outcome, what comes out of the land. Surrogate colonialism is a type of colonialism project where a foreign power encourages and provides support for a settlement project of foreign people over land occupied by the native, not coming from the British or from the French. Foreign people, they are outside the land, in this case the Zionists. This is quite clear. There is an excellent article in the American, I believe, anthropological society. It's called The Surrogate Colonization of Palestine, 1917 and 1939. This is about 44 pages. But the beginning of it is, I have a copy if somebody wants to look at it, but the beginning of it is clearly a map or mapping what happened in the case of Palestine. That how this surrogate colonialism developed, and the agreement between the Zionists and the British government, Balfour Agreement, etc., that ultimately led to the occupation of the land. Here, although if you go back to the books, Rashid Khalidi's book, The 100 Years, speaks about settler colonialism. What he means, settler colonialism, that technically is a group of people coming from somewhere else and settling. What he means is the surrogate colonialism. When you read the book, it's a group of people that are granted the right to come and occupy lands that neither it's the colonial power and nor it's the land themselves. If you look at the history of what we call the multi-faith existence in Palestine, always have been Muslim, Christian, Jews living side by side. So the problem is not the diversity of the faith. The problem is this occupation, the cancerous cell that have been created in the middle of Palestine by the British, and ultimately has led to destabilization of the region. The Balfour Declaration that became the legal foundation for the Zionist settlement in Palestine, and also the white settlement in Africa, South Africa, by the Dutch and later on by the British, the same thing. These are all what we call falls under the category of surrogate colonialism. In recent years, the term has been used in a more general context, settler colonialism, to include even rulers, our own rulers, that become foreign to our and insensitive to our own values. When you have rulers of emirate providing huge convoy of support to the Zionists, and their pilots going in support of the Zionists, and they bomb Palestinians, and they are proud of it. Abdullah of Jordan does the same thing. They all corridors created for Zionists to go to Jordan and from there somewhere else. So these are foreign to our value system in the Arab world or anything else. So they have said that these individuals, because of they have become foreign, we can call them and put them under the surrogate colonialism, where they are put in charge of the Muslim world, technically from their own, they are Arab by name, but the value system is totally different. It doesn't need surrogate colonialism to be from somewhere else. In the case of Zionism, the Zionist values and whole conception of living was different from the Palestinians. Not because they were Jews, because the Ashkenazis were nominal Jews, secular Jews. And they used the Jewishness was used as a pretext to control the land. These individuals are nominal Arabs by name, but in reality, the book by Fanon that talks about the black skin, white mask is quite clear in this type, where how various individuals, particularly the French, after leaving Africa, they trained certain individuals to be in charge of the country, and if some that in reality they were the extension of the arm of the French for colonization, extension of the colonization. The next topic that we really need to discuss that relates to this colonization and imperialism is Zionism. How it came to exist in the late 19th century, what kind of relationship they had, and establishment of colonialism supported them, particularly the wealthy Jews that existed, secular Jews that existed in the West, and how they played a major role in the creation of this artificial state, particularly in buying lands, what we call as a project of buying lands and using it for the process of for the benefit of colonization or exploitation. But this time, this land that was purchased was allowed for Ashkenazi Jews to go in and occupy the land and expel everything else by huge act of genocide. If you go back to Al-Jadid, the first day, which was the 7th of October, if you can find it, Dina Ahmed, the presenter, she did an excellent job of bringing together somehow acknowledgement of the early Ashkenazi Jews that came to United States, to Palestine, and the fact that their project was to wipe out all Palestinians. We used to go, and a couple of them, they said, we used to go into a village, we filled our reserves with bullet, and we closed our eyes and we put our hand on the trigger on automatic. It didn't matter to us who was there. Children, women, adult, old, young, everything has to be wiped. As a matter of fact, David Ben-Gurion came to United States in 1946, a year and something before what they called creation of state, and moved around this country looking at the reservation site for the Native Americans, because ultimately Palestinians had to go back into the reservation. So I stop here, but next topic inshallah will be Zionism, its establishment, its development, etc., etc. If you get a chance, please look at an article that will be useful. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.